My name is Mira Whitman. I'm 30 years old, and for the last 7 years I've worked in construction. Not because I ran out of options or couldn't make something else of myself. I have an associate's degree. I'm comfortable with numbers, I communicate well, and I could have followed a completely different career path if I'd wanted to. But I chose this one because it fits me. I'm good at it. I earn every dollar honestly, and at the end of each day I can stand back, look at a building taking shape, and know my work helped put it there. My hands are rough, my boots have been worn uneven from years on job sites, and most evenings I smell like lumber, dust, and sweat. None of that has ever embarrassed me. At least, it hadn't until my own mother made me wonder if it should. It happened during the second week of November. I had just finished a 12-hour shift and was driving home, still wearing my reflective vest. The windows were cracked because my truck's heater always blasted more warmth than I needed. When my phone rang and I saw Mom's name, I figured it would be something ordinary. Maybe she'd ask what I was bringing for Thanksgiving, or remind me to grab something from the grocery store. Instead, after I answered, there was silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where you know someone has practiced what they're about to say. Mira, she finally began, about Thanksgiving. I smiled and told her I'd already planned on making my sweet potato casserole. Dad never lets that holiday pass without asking for seconds, sometimes thirds. She hesitated again. We're doing things a little differently this year. I frowned but stayed quiet. Theo is bringing someone. A woman he's been seeing. It's getting serious. That actually made me happy. My younger brother was 26, and most of his relationships barely lasted longer than a month before collapsing into awkward arguments and dramatic text messages. Hearing he'd finally met someone worth introducing to the family genuinely sounded like good news. Then Mom lowered her voice. The problem is, Theo doesn't want you to come. I felt everything inside me freeze. The truck kept moving, the tires kept rolling over the pavement, but somehow it felt like time had stopped. He thinks. She continued carefully, your job might make things uncomfortable. I couldn't even respond. He said you might show up wearing work clothes. That Sarah could ask what you do, and it would become awkward. She took another breath before saying the part that hurt the most. He thinks your blue-collar job would embarrass him. I stared through the windshield without seeing anything. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. Then Mom filled the silence. We didn't want to hurt your feelings, sweetheart. But this dinner is important to Theo. We just want everything to go well. I'm sure you understand. Understand. That word echoed louder than everything else she'd said. Because in that moment I realized she hadn't argued with him. She hadn't defended me. She hadn't told her son that family doesn't work that way. She had simply accepted it and called to deliver the message. I considered fighting back. I imagined asking how a mother could willingly exclude her own daughter to protect someone else's image. I thought about crying. I thought about hanging up. Instead, I quietly said, I understand. But what I meant wasn't what she believed. After we ended the call, I stayed parked in my driveway for nearly 20 minutes. Across the street, my neighbor's little girl was drawing with sidewalk chalk. A crooked little house. A bright yellow sun. Stick figures holding hands. I watched her until the pressure in my chest eased enough for me to walk inside. That night I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my best friend, Leanne. I didn't vent to Dominic from work, even though I knew he'd probably march straight to Theo's apartment and give him a piece of his mind. I just let myself sit with the pain. Because that's what it was. Pain. Not anger. Not yet. The kind of hurt that comes from realizing the people who should be proud of you have somehow decided your life is something they need to hide. What none of them knew was that 3 weeks earlier, my own career had completely changed. After years of proving myself, I'd signed the biggest contract of my professional life. A major commercial development. The kind of project people in the industry actually talked about. I wasn't simply another worker swinging a hammer anymore. I'd been promoted to site supervisor. People answered to me now. The responsibility was enormous, and I'd earned every bit of it. I hadn't shared the news because I wanted everything finalized first. My plan had been simple. Thanksgiving dinner. Family gathered around the table. Sweet potato casserole in the center. Then I'd tell everyone. I wanted to see Dad smile. I wanted Mom to be proud. Instead, before I ever had the chance, they decided I wasn't welcome. So I kept my promotion to myself. If they wanted Thanksgiving without me, I was willing to let them have exactly that. Sometimes 5 days can teach people lessons years never do. The holiday arrived, and I spent it alone. Oddly enough, it wasn't nearly as depressing as it sounds. Leanne invited me over with her family more than once, but I politely declined. I wasn't looking for another table. I needed peace. I cooked a full meal anyway. Roasted chicken. Mashed potatoes. Fresh vegetables. And of course, my sweet potato casserole. There was no chance I was letting Theo ruin my favorite holiday recipe. I sat in my own apartment, surrounded by things I'd paid for with money I'd earned through years of hard work. At least, that's how my mother would describe long mornings, sore muscles, because by the time she finally called me again, and countless hours on construction sites while trying to explain what had happened around that dinner table, everything my family thought they understood about respect, I felt something unexpected, and dignity had been turned completely upside down. Without judgment, the reason became clear almost without pretending to be someone else. Sarah hadn't grown up looking down on construction work made anyone uncomfortable. In fact, she had grown up surrounded by it. Thanksgiving at my parents' house wasn't unfolding the way anyone construction company in the neighboring state. The woman Theo and her older sister had recently taken over as project manager on a major federal infrastructure project. Quick to smile, blueprints, and far sharper than anyone had given her credit for. And job sites weren't foreign to her. They were part of everyday conversation around her family's dinner table. To Sarah, people who built roads, offices, and bridges weren't somehow beneath anyone else. They were the people who made everything else possible. So when the conversation drifted toward careers over Thanksgiving dinner, Theo casually described his family as being made up of white-collar, career-driven professionals. Sarah smiled politely, accepting what he'd said without interruption. Then she asked a simple question. Do you have any brothers or sisters? Theo nodded. One sister. What does she do? Without giving it much thought, he answered, she works construction. From the way Mom later described it, his tone carried the kind of reluctant embarrassment someone might use when explaining away an unfortunate mistake. It wasn't what he said as much as how he said it. Sarah slowly set her fork on her plate. What kind of construction? She asked. Theo admitted he didn't really know. She asked whether I managed projects or simply worked under someone else's supervision. Again, he shrugged, saying he assumed I just worked on different sites. Then came the question nobody at the table had expected. If she lives nearby, why isn't she here? That was the moment everything shifted. Mom could have softened the truth. She could have changed the subject or offered some harmless excuse. Instead, for reasons she still can't fully explain, she told Sarah exactly what had happened. She admitted that Theo had asked for me not to be invited because he believed my profession might make dinner uncomfortable. The room fell completely silent. Not awkward silence. Disappointed silence. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't lecture anyone. She simply looked at Theo for several long seconds with an expression Mom later struggled to describe. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter. More unsettling. The expression of someone carefully reevaluating everything they thought they knew about another person. Finally, she spoke. She said she found the whole situation deeply confusing. In her family, the people with calloused hands were often the most admired people in the room. She told them her father had started by pouring concrete when he was 19 years old. Decades later, he'd built a company that employed more than 300 people. Nothing about that story embarrassed her. It inspired her. Then she added something that no one around the table could answer. I would have loved to meet your sister. Theo laughed nervously, trying to rescue the conversation. He insisted he'd only worried that the difference between our worlds might create an uncomfortable situation. Sarah gently shook her head. I don't think our worlds are nearly as different as you believe, she replied. I'd rather decide that for myself. The meal continued after that, but according to Dad, it never truly recovered. The easy conversation disappeared. Everyone became painfully aware that something important had been exposed. And for the first time, it wasn't me who looked out of place. 5 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, I found Mom, Dad, and Theo standing together on my porch. Mom looked exhausted, as though sleep had abandoned her for nearly a week. Dad wore the expression of a man who would have preferred avoiding uncomfortable conversations but understood this one couldn't be postponed. Theo barely looked up. He seemed like someone who had spent days replaying every decision he'd made until there was nothing left to defend. I stepped aside and invited them in. Old habits are difficult to break. I put on a pot of coffee because that's how I was raised. Guests get something warm to drink, even if those same guests had recently decided you weren't worthy of sharing their holiday table. We settled into the kitchen. Mom spoke first. She explained every detail of Thanksgiving dinner. She told me about Sarah's questions. She repeated Sarah's response almost word for word. Then she turned toward Theo. He has something he wants to tell you. For a long moment he stared into his coffee mug before finally speaking. I found out about your promotion. I didn't answer. He continued. Leanne posted something online. She tagged your company, and I looked it up. Another pause. Mira, you're overseeing a $12 million commercial development. I took a sip of coffee before correcting him. It was 12 million originally, I said. After the revised scope, it's closer to 14. The silence that followed was almost unbelievable. Nobody had anything to say. I won't pretend I didn't feel something in that moment. After everything that had happened, watching their assumptions collapse under the weight of reality was strangely satisfying. Dad eventually cleared his throat. I'm proud of you. I looked at him and smiled politely. Thank you, I replied. I just wish I'd heard that before I was left off the Thanksgiving guest list. No one argued. No one could. Mom quietly started crying. I handed her a napkin. Not because everything was suddenly forgiven. Because sometimes people have to fully experience the consequences of their choices before healing can begin. The very thing Theo had tried to hide was the exact reason Sarah respected me before we'd even met. He still tried to explain what he'd been thinking. He talked too much about appearances and first impressions. There were moments where he defended himself when he probably shouldn't have. The honest work. But underneath all of that, Everything he believed diminished me had actually revealed my value to someone who understood exactly what that work represented. Not because he deserved immediate forgiveness. A week later Sarah reached out through Theo and asked if I'd meet her for coffee. Holding on to that kind of hurt weighs you down. And we ended up spending every workday lifting heavy materials. I had no stories about growing up around construction sites and how her father still slowed down whenever they drove past buildings he'd helped create decades earlier. We all understood it. She said he never lost the feeling of pride that came from seeing something permanent rise because of his own effort. I understood exactly what she meant. I told her about the first day I was trusted to lead my own crew, and how, for the first time, I felt like years of hard work had finally come together. By the end of the afternoon we'd exchanged phone numbers, not out of politeness, but because we genuinely enjoyed talking to each other. As for Theo, they're still together. From everything I've seen, they're happy. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons people never expected. Just last month, Sarah's father contacted me directly. He'd heard about my project through industry connections and wanted to discuss working together on a commercial development plan for the spring. I couldn't help smiling after that conversation. My brother had tried so hard to keep me away from one dinner table because he thought my career would make him look bad. Instead, his decision introduced me to people who valued exactly what I'd spent years becoming. Today my boots are still covered in dust by the end of the day. My hands are still rough. I still come home smelling like fresh lumber, concrete, and hard work. The only difference now is that if someone thinks those things are embarrassing, I no longer question myself. I simply know they haven't yet learned the difference between status and substance.